Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist.
And today we're going to be talking about letting your partner know what you want. So that will be the topic. Let your partner know what you want. And the reason I brought this up is because in my past 3 failed relationships, I don't think I expressed this as clearly as I could. And I think part of it was that I didn't exactly know what I wanted. I also think another part was I was embarrassed to ask for what I wanted. And then another part was that when I did express a want, I would sometimes be met with resistance, which kind of shut me down and made me feel like, what's the point of asking for anything?
Yeah, for people who are just tuning in for the first time, Jason always sends something my way like this by way of a topic that I've never discussed with him. We don't know. I have no idea what's happening as we step into the podcast. This is a really good one, though, I think, and it comes up every week in my professional life.
Really nice. It'd be good to get into that. Yeah, and ever since I've been working with you and like doing these podcasts and things like that, I've learned to ask for what I want, and that the right person will be able to like hear that, and not that I'm asking for like crazy wants or demands that are like insane, but just kind of doing so in a way, or saying what I need to say that allows me to be myself, I think is the thing about this, and expressing what I want, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I actually was in a couple of conversations about this kind of thing this last week. And one of the things I learned is that I don't always have to ask for what I want. I think there's sometimes a far more effective approach in telling someone what I want, and what I want, not necessarily from them, but what I want out of life and what I want out of a relationship. And one of my clients confronted me, it was an intriguing moment because I seldom think anybody would be against the idea of an abuse-free relationship based on equality. Well, he was against this idea. And the take he had on it was, well, that just sounds so weak. And I was a little surprised, and I cocked my head in my confusion. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, it just sounds so whiny and puerile. And I said, well, actually, it's a stronger standard than waiting for the relationship to get violent before I have a boundary. I'm saying that the verbal abuse, is actually the foreplay that would, over time, desensitize the couple to the point where violence would be the next step. But the whole problem is any attempt to impose my will on another person. And if you don't want that, just letting the other person know, hey, someday I hope I can have an abuse-free relationship based on equality. And that was all it took. All I had to do was explain. He said, that makes sense. So I don't even have to ask, well, would it be okay with you if we had an abuse-free relationship?
Yeah.
Because it's really just an idea at a certain young point in a relationship. And my articulating what I need and what I want gives the other person a chance to consider the idea without pressure. And I have had conversations where, when I was single dating, women would say, yeah, I don't think I can do that for you. And okay, well, that's kind of an interesting thing for me to hear. What are you thinking about that makes you say that? And then we get into a conversation, but it just feels so free of negotiation and trying to land the sale, or I'll always be closing it. I don't have to close anybody on this. If they really don't think they can do it, who am I to disagree?
Yeah,
with that, and to just be able to hear them out and to really understand where they're coming from. So sometimes just being able to not so much ask, but articulate what I need. I like that better for me as a man. And I think it would work for men and women because it leads us into a position where we're not left hanging for the okay from the other person.
And you're talking about doing this early on in the relationship, like during the intentional interview phase is what we call it.
Yeah, I think particularly the example I just mentioned, that I'm looking for an abuse-free relationship based on equality, that could legitimately come up in a first conversation, even on a first date where, so what are you looking for in life? Or when do you think you'll settle down? Or what is it that you're looking for in a relationship? And but it might not come up until much later in a relationship, because I think all of these conversations really need to come up organically and comfortably. And so there is no rule that says, oh, by the third date, I have to be able to articulate this one or later. And then, the fallback too is when the other person says or demonstrates through their behavior, they're not going to be able to meet my needs. For me to be able to say, this isn't really working for me.
Yeah.
And then to articulate what it is I am looking for. I think that's so much stronger than trying to talk the other person into being someone they are not. Now, if they do say, well, gee, I had no idea you needed that. I love doing that. I have no problem with whatever it is.
Yeah.
Then that changes the whole conversation, right? But there are lots of times where I think we get enmeshed to the point where it's even when it comes to a breakup, we're looking for permission from the other person to break up. And this way I have of talking about it, I would suggest really works better for all of us, because at the end of all of the talking, I'm responsible for my life and for the choices of who I partner up with. And if I'm with someone who's demonstrating in a very convincing way that they're not going to be able to meet my needs, who am I to try to move heaven and earth to change them into someone they really are not ready to be right now?
Yeah. So I have a few things. There's a lot. So for one, do you think it's beneficial to have that conversation with the person that you're dating, like explicitly tell them that it's not going to work and why?
Well, to say it's not working in the present tense, this isn't really working for me.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting discussion. I think if a woman said that to me, I would find that very intriguing. And what's nice about it, I think the way that she phrased it in this hypothetical situation is she didn't say, you don't work for me, or you're not good enough, or anything like that, but just, we're so different, we're so incompatible, this really isn't working for me. I think there's an important reference here. The 20th century philosophers who were leading the existential movement eventually produced a man who said, I cannot know myself until I first know the other. I think it bears repeating. I cannot know myself until I first know the other. How do you know how much affection you need until you get together with someone who cannot be affectionate in the way you need at all? And then wow, I had no idea they made humans in that version before. I thought we were all alike in that way. Or someone who's, wherever you are on the scale of intellectual stimulation and needing that kind of stimulation, someone who's perhaps much more than you in that area, or even anti-intellectual. Well, that you find out kind of where you are, or that you lie and your needs lie on a continuum where it's not binary, it's not all or nothing, and that it certainly is a variable that can really be kind of awful, catastrophic even, if you don't find someone with whom you can come together on that.
Have you ever had it where it was hard to leave a relationship, even though you knew that it wasn't working, like with you and I?
Well, I'm laughing because, if I ever find it, in my history of profound neediness, have I ever found it hard to leave? Yeah, because you're giving up the bird in the hand for the two in some future bush that you're hoping for, because I am, remember, with someone I find attractive who's willing to be seen with me in public. So I actually have two birds in the hand, and you want me to give that up for all of that plus compatibility, which I've never experienced. So it's a little, I think it's very difficult, and my experience has been we men particularly have a very difficult time admitting how needy we are. And you see it nevertheless. I mean, anybody with eyes can see how needy men are because they don't give up. They don't accept reality or life on life's terms. Mm-hmm. They are maybe constantly grasping at her and then inevitably and pathetically trying to get her to change, to not be who she is. And you certainly see the female analog of that. Mm-hmm. And it's rather off-putting for everybody once you get into that situation. But people have a really hard time admitting that they're needy because I guess they experience shame over that. But I assure everyone, it's just part of the human condition, like getting really, really hungry for food. We sometimes get really, really emotionally needy, and we're afraid of being alone or facing life after the other one leaves. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, I think we're all going to be just fine if we could face that fear.
Yeah. I keep hearing people talk about how hard relationships are. And we talk about how they don't have to be that difficult. But I mean, smart people who are older, and they're maybe famous or on doing whatever articles or YouTube, or they have careers, and they're still like holding on to that thing, how difficult it is to be.
Relationships take a lot of hard work.
Yes.
And whenever I hear that, I just burst into laughter, peals of laughter, as a matter of fact, because it's really kind of crazy. Our species is a social species. Getting together with others is supposed to be our strong suit. And yet, when we do nothing to prepare each generation for intimate relationships, including intimate friendship, it's no surprise that we think they take a lot of work, because what we're actually doing is not so much working on the relationship, but really trying to figure out how relationships, plural, how they work. And so if I can accept, for example, something as simple as, well, sometimes I get really needy and lonely and clingy, and I keep grasping at a relationship where there's just an abundance of evidence that I'm with the wrong person, or I'm the wrong person for her. And then that's easy, right? Giving up is easy. Walking away is easy. Going on to the next person is easy. And then you meet somebody with whom you're truly compatible. And there's this delightful process of seeing just how compatible you are as the months and perhaps even years go by. And it feels oddly easy. Well, yeah, it is easy, and it's supposed to be easy. If it's hard, I just want to respectfully suggest to everybody out there, if it's really hard, then you're probably in the wrong relationship. Ouch. So that's that ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure thing I keep bringing out from poor old Benjamin Franklin. I don't know if he ever knew his aphorism was going to be drafted into service in psychology, but there it is. I think so often we are reactive and we wait for the proverbial shit to hit the fan before we end up realizing, oh, wow, this really is bad. I need to work on it. Instead of doing an intentional interview that lets me know who this person really is, and while I'm simultaneously letting them know who I really am, and kind of coming to some point, usually a mutual agreement that, boy, are we not well suited to each other. But we don't do that. So yeah, relationships take a lot of hard work.
Yeah. Well, I like how you put that, as far as saying like they would be hard if we don't have any instructions to it, essentially. Right. It's like we're trying to do something where we have no instruction manual, little to no guidance, and that's going to make it challenging. And then when you're in it, and then you see the majority of people having challenges, it's like, yeah, the majority of people are having challenges because no one knows the hell they're doing. So that means that the storyline becomes relationships are hard.
Right.
But if you had the information that you talk about, and you actually did the intentional interview, and you did compatibility, like actually ask them questions to see if you are compatible, rather than just getting into a relationship with someone because you're attracted to them and they're cool seeing you in public, being seen in public with you, which is what most people do, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a pretty low bar, and sort of pathetic when you say it out loud to yourself. But I'm used to it now. That's who I was, and I was thinking about a relationship you had entered into not too long ago, and it was fairly brief, the one that you most recently got into.
Mm-hmm.
And you got out of it before knowing her for very many months.
Mm-hmm.
But as you look back, it wasn't hard at all, was it? It wasn't difficult.
Which one are you talking about?
Oh, the one with the astrophysicist.
Okay, yes. It was, it was like over a year. So, but it was an intentional interview over a year and just getting to know the other person. And at first it wasn't going to be romantic, but we talked and had phone conversations and Skype and things like that, text messages. So, but then when you got to the point where she actually came to visit and we had the conversations in person, and then to make a move like that, as far as like committing to somebody long-term, long distance like that, because she lived in a different state. And we decided that there were some things that it was just not compatible. It made it way easier. Like there was still like
that's what I was getting at, is the easy versus difficult part.
Yeah, there's still a little bit of like a loss there.
Absolutely.
But it was also, but it wasn't like we talk about where I didn't like sacrifice myself to the relationship or put my neediness so much into it to where I left it feeling completely deflated.
Right.
Like it felt good. Like it felt positive. There were definitely feelings there, like I said, a little bit of loss, but I didn't leave that feeling traumatized or anything else. You usually feel like when you get into stuff like that sometimes.
So for you, and I'm just picking on you because you're the one with the most recent effort there, and it was pleasurable getting to know her.
Yes.
And it was not devastating to your identity or your character to accept that she and you were not cut out for each other.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So when I hear you talk about that, or when I hear anyone explain their experience like that, it's very almost comforting to me as a therapist, because you make it look easy now.
Yeah.
You're dating, you're getting to know someone, and then, you find out they're really not truly compatible with you. And then, so you move on. That doesn't sound like a tragic love lost kind of story.
Yeah.
It just sounds like a normal adult going through life and enjoying his life.
Yeah. Well, it felt really good to apply the stuff into that, because before I would not do any of that. I would just be, let's date, or, I'd just be pushing different agendas. But this was like we talk about forming a lifelong commitment with somebody, like a long-term partnership, and building that. And like, they have to completely know who you are. So you got to be completely honest with them, even things that maybe you don't want to talk about. You have to tell them what you want. You have to know what you want. And then they have to you have to give the space for them to kind of say their story and what they're looking for. And then I think you make somewhat of an intelligent decision on it, because like you said, marriage is, it's supposed to last a lifetime. And these relationships, you want to be with somebody who you're compatible with and who's crazy about you. And if it's not that, then why mess with it?
Well, because you're really needy, right?
Yeah.
And I've done that for sure. Mm-hmm. And in my neediness, that was my agenda, that don't leave me.
Yeah.
Let's keep working on this. Let's keep working it out.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was kind of a fool's construct there for me to do all that in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, it robs dating of the inherent pleasure that's supposed to be part of dating. Because really, for me, even meeting today, the man I am today, if I were suddenly single and dating, meeting and dating the absolute most incompatible person, I think would be kind of fun. That it would be fun to get to know them, and it would be fun to kind of delight at how very incompatible we are, and to have a laugh over that.
Well, you're more advanced, because people are like, I don't want to deal with people like that. But by hearing you say that, it's changed my story about it too. Because I hear people talk about that all the time, and they're all annoyed with it and they're upset. And it's like, can't you just actually just enjoy it? Even if it's not going to be the person for you, you could still enjoy getting to know who this person is.
Absolutely. And the alternative is I just walk around through life kind of like an emotionally needy zombie, you know, with my arms out in front of me, looking to grab onto somebody. And that doesn't sound very fun at all. But I think for the person who knows this kind of information, dating is one fun event after another event. So even if I meet somebody who, say, has an absolute deal breaker for me, and I'm not saying this for other people, but say she's a chain smoker. And I didn't know that before we got set up on this date, and we're out on this date, and she's always looking to grab a smoke. And I think for me, it's like one of those things where you just have to laugh at the absurdity of life and how different we all are. And being a cigarette smoker to me is not a moral issue. It's simply an issue of incompatibility, because I know lots of good men who would have no problem with a cigarette smoker. And I know lots of good women who do smoke cigarettes. So it's funny. It's like the little proverbial fly in the ointment, although that sounds pretty gross. It's just some small thing that would ruin it for me.
If a woman had everything perfect and she smoked, you would still say no?
Well, and I thank you for asking that, because I don't take pride in that. For me, to be honest, yes, the short answer to your question is yes. I would still have to say adios. But the reason for that is because I've come to a point of acceptance of my human weakness. I'm not invincible. I definitely have my limits in terms of my tolerance, my patience, my ability to appreciate another human being, my ability even to love. I think of myself as a pretty loving person, but I definitely can't say I love everyone.
Yeah.
That would make me like a god, right? To say that I love all people on the earth equally.
Yeah.
But I don't. And so because of my human limitations, there are some things that are big, like say a prospect who lacked human compassion. Yeah, I would say no and walk away from that opportunity. But then something as banal and small as cigarette smoking, that would be something I'd have to walk away from as well. And there are other similarly small things. That's not the only one, but there are others that I know that for a weekend or on a date, they wouldn't matter to me. But over a lifetime, however long that may be for us, a lifetime, that would get pretty old pretty fast. And it would like the fly in the ointment, or some other polluting thing. It would ruin an otherwise really good relationship, only because of my human fallibility and intolerance and shortcomings.
Yeah.
So I own it. And I can't say, it would be about the other person. And there are a lot of things like that. It's not one or two things. It's like probably dozens of things like that. Like think of all the music you enjoy or I enjoy in life. And then imagine the perfect woman coming along who hates every kind of music you like. And she loves the one kind of music you never can tolerate.
Yeah.
And that's what she plays all the time. Well, how's that supposed to last? How's that supposed to work out? I
get earplugs.
Yeah. And is that the way I would want to live?
Yeah.
I mean, do I want to treat my home as a hazmat site where I have to glove up and put in my earbuds and do everything else before I walk in my home? No, I don't want to do that.
What about, I do like how you mentioned the human limitations, because it really helps me like accept my own. And I think a lot of times people are saying, like get through them or push through it, or you should be this way or that way.
Yeah, you should be more loving, or you shouldn't be so judgmental.
And then you start feeling bad about yourself because it's like, man, I suck. I can't get over this. And then you're trying to deny this part of yourself. I mean, you could always like work with it and kind of maybe grow, but some things maybe you'll just have for this human life that you're in at this moment. It's not going to go away. And why not accept that and stop beating yourself up?
And do I even want to grow into the guy who's comfortable living with a smoker? Well, I mean, there's so many health reasons to say no to that. I really don't want to do that. So I'm not motivated. I've got no desire to do that. And as long as I find out in a timely manner, like before a wedding date, I would want to be able to say, yeah, that's really not going to work for me. But to flip the script a little bit, I remember being involved with a woman who found my own bookworm habit of reading all the time. She found that excruciatingly painful, very annoying, and would roll her eyes or make some sort of disgusted sound whenever she'd see me with the book.
Yeah.
But my current wife, with whom, I've shared a home for 30 years, she loves that very same trait. Yeah. Right. So I imagine that, there's a saying from the Kurdish, every pot has a lid, and they apply that to romance. So whatever it is that somebody doesn't like about me, it just means I'm with the wrong person.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean necessarily there's something wrong with me. Now, what if I find her patience annoying, or I find her compassion annoying, something that I do value, but she's just so much better at it than I am that it's sort of challenging to me. Well, for me, that would be something I would want to grow into, right?
Yeah.
And I can see how that would be kind of a spiritual asset in a relationship. But no, I'm not willing to give up reading in order to please a mate, nor am I willing to give up my dislike of tobacco products in the home.
Yeah.
So, it's a judgment call, and I think intelligent people are perfectly capable of making that call.
Yeah. And when you do start realizing that for yourself, like, you're not going to give up reading, or it's like if you're like the girl that we talked about with me, she had something with me that she wasn't thrilled about, but I was like, oh, am I going to give that up? And then I was like, no, probably not. And and it was like, that's just who I am. It's like, it's not going to change. And, it felt good just to say, even though it meant a no, it meant that she wasn't thrilled about it, but it also didn't feel personal, because it was like, we were both like seeing each other as who the person was. And
I love that comment that it wasn't personal. It was really just about who she was.
Yeah.
And I can easily sympathize with her, and I don't even know what the issue was, nor does it matter. I remember dating women, plural, who complained that, oh, you always want to talk about things. Why do you always want to talk about things? Well, that runs counter to the stereotype that women have of men, that men don't want to talk about things. So in a sense, I was the girl in the relationship. And of course, there are going to be lots of women who would value a man who wanted to talk about things.
Yeah.
And the same thing was true of women who perceived I was always thinking about things. Why are you always, you need to stop thinking about things so much. And the idea of going through life deliberately with less thinking rather than more thinking, it just seemed like an absolutely crazy idea to me. And whether it is or it isn't, it's not how I want to live my life.
Yeah.
So, really taking people at their word, and when they say things to you, really listening, and, you can talk about it with them and figure out what did they really mean. But sometimes people just are bluntly honest, and they tell us who they are.
Yeah.
And accepting that, I think, is really important. And back to your theme, it's easier than trying to make them into someone they aren't, or trying to make yourself into someone you are not. And that's what we're going for here, right? Is making life easier for human beings to have great relationships, and to just be easier in their soul as they go through life, looking for that mate who really works for them.
Yeah.
I didn't meet that person, by the way, until I was 40. And so I don't think there is a timeline like you have to Well, by the time you're 29 or 30, you should definitely have found somebody you could settle in with.
But we have those in our heads.
We often do.
Family and society and
and it makes
culture.
No sense at all, because it's like saying any other arbitrary time would be the right time. And so maybe 100 years ago or 200 years ago, if you haven't found the right person by the time you're 16, oh my God, you're going to be some old maid. Is that really where you're going with this?
All alone at 21 years old.
Right. And so, I'm old enough to remember a time when it really wasn't unusual for me to get married at age 20. Now, with people living longer and also thinking more carefully, I think the younger generation does think a little more carefully than my own generation. And I think and also they feel less pressure from religion to tie the knot, get legally married. And so they're taking their time really getting to know others. And I think that deserves some real appreciation, from the rest of us who grew up in that earlier generation. I think it's a really smart idea to leisurely take your time and spend a year or two getting to know somebody at least before you settle down with them.
Yeah. I would say, do you have people who say, oh, Steve, you're being too picky, you're being too ideal in this sort of match or your search for a partner? It's like I
had people say that, and usually, not to be unkind to them, but usually it was from people who were also unhappily partnered up. And so by their standard, I was being too picky because they had low expectations of a relationship ever really being delightfully happy. And I had already been through an unhappy relationship in my first marriage. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to try the other end of the continuum and see what it's like to be deliriously happy and joyful, and look forward to coming home every day and look forward to seeing my partner's face. And it is wonderful to experience that. But I had one guy who was really a wonderful man and a wonderful friend. And he looked at me with a frown on his face one day and he said, your problem is you want to be adored. And I just come out of a relationship where I had the opposite of that experience. And I realized, I thought about it for a minute. Like I looked up in the air, like Columbo in that old TV show. And I thought, actually, I do want to be adored. That's kind of one of the things I'm hoping for. And I said, don't you want that? And he was one of those guys in an unhappy relationship who, he said, there's nothing wrong with that. But then he was distinctly uncomfortable and we never talked about it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would you say on like a scale of 1 to 10, how happy most people are in their relationships?
I think there are some wonderfully happy people out there, but generally speaking, most of us really don't know very many deliriously happy people who are married together. They, one woman I worked with, she said her last boyfriend had told her he'd be glad to get married anytime, as soon as she could show him one marriage where people were happy, and she never could.
Yeah.
So, or one marriage, I think his phrase was one marriage that she would like to be a part of, and she never could find that relationship. So I think on a scale of 1 to 10 or a percentage, I think many, many people just sort of settle, and they may not be miserable, but they're just sort of, it's okay, and I'd rather just be alone because I have escaped that sort of emotional neediness. And then invariably you get the people, and I'm sure there's some listening right now who, well, my grandparents met when they were teenagers in high school, and they've been together 50 years or 80 years or however long it's been.
Yeah.
And they're still married. But longevity is really not longevity of a relationship, like say of a 60-year, 70-year marriage. That's not really an apt metric to measure happiness, because, and this came out in a study that was done of older couples, and they ended up terminating the study prematurely because all of the older couples they kept meeting were telling the researchers, well, we just stayed married because that's what you do.
Yeah.
And one guy said, what? I'm give up an apartment in New York City? I'm not doing that. So his marriage was sort of a key to a better lifestyle. And, I understand why people would conflate better lifestyle or settling in terms of safety and security with happiness. But I had safety and security on my own, and I didn't need a partner for that. And in this modern era, I think we have the opportunity to date and to get to know people and to be sociable and go out and have great lives without being married. So there really isn't any pressure on any of us to get married prematurely until we find someone who really works for us.
Yeah. Well, once you understand like all this stuff, I feel like then you could start looking for that person. But if you don't, I think you really have to I think then going back to the wants, I think you have to even know what you want. Like I said in the beginning, like I didn't know what I wanted in my first 3 relationships. It was like, I wanted to have sex with a woman. That's probably number one. That's probably,
who doesn't?
Yeah. So that was one. And then it was like, but I'm like, I don't like marriages to me. It never looked appealing because everyone did not seem happy. Like my scale would be like on a scale of 1 to 10. I don't think that, I think, it's very rare where people are actually happy in their relationships.
Say it a 9 or a 10.
Yeah. And then they all, or if they, or they just say, this is just the way that it is. And then I remember thinking like you, even back then, I remember thinking like, well, I'm not going to get married because it looks like it sucks. And then that was a story, but then people want to get married and that causes problems in relationships, or they want to have kids. And you're like, well, our relationship doesn't seem great. Why we have kids? Oh, well, we shouldn't be thinking about that stuff. I'm just like, well, I think we should, I don't know. I'm not getting lost there, but I was saying like the one time I was in a relationship, she's like, we should just have kids. I was like, well, our relationship, I think needs to have some work done on it before we bring another kid into this world. And then she's like, I don't think it should work that way.
No, you just reproduce and then the chips fall where they may. That's not what I would want to do, because I've done something like that in my first unhappy marriage. And then you have children you share with this other adult that you don't get along with for the rest of your life, right? Hopefully the children are alive and doing well. But it just, if the relationship fails, it fails typically for some good reasons. And then I'm reminded of that every single time she and I get together for weddings or baptisms or whatever the hell's going on. And I think it does make more sense. In fact, when I think about marriage isn't marriage isn't needed to reproduce in this day and age. So a woman who really wanted to have children right away, she can get together with her donor and go ahead and get pregnant and start having kids. But I think without that real certitude that you're loved and adored individually as a man, whether she has children or not, leaves you in the position, if she does have children, of not only being the sperm donor, but you're also merely the blank check who keeps paying for child support for the next 18 years. And I don't think any of us are excited to be in that sort of a role. We really don't mind. I don't mind being supportive of my own children or the people I care about, but I really wouldn't want to be doing that if none of them had feelings for me, and particularly the mother of the children. So that would be rather a thankless job. And I think that's why a lot of people are really taking their own sweet time about the institution of marriage. And I know lots of people are still getting married, but marriage is losing its cachet in our society because we haven't bridged the gap into this new way of thinking about it, where it's not about longevity and it's not about say, developing the family farm, and it's not about finding shelter from the elements. It's really because men and women both can earn a living, and they can both have a great life as separate single individuals. So there really has to be something. There has to be some pleasure waiting for me that I can't get any other way, and there is. I think marriage, for me, I'm a big fan. I would say marriage is great, but it's not great if you don't do it right. And then doing it right, I don't mean morally, I mean doing it right in terms of thinking it through and building it, putting it together. It's a little bit like, it's great to have a house and to have shelter, but if you put together a house improperly and unskillfully, it's going to fall over in the first storm, and it's going to be deadly. It's going to be a real trap for you financially the rest of your life. So we try to build intelligently. And that's the thing that's missing from all these discussions in religion, is nobody is talking about how to do it intelligently. Nobody's talking about that in our schools. And even our parents, God bless them, I think they mean the best, but they don't really have the sentences in their mouth to explain how to do it intelligently. And I think largely because nobody explained it to them, and they themselves haven't maybe even learned how to do it. I have no end of older clients who love their children, whether they're still children or adult children, and they would do anything, go to any length to help their children be happy and successful, including advising them to leave a relationship that looked exactly like their parents' relationship. And so if you can imagine an arithmetic problem in your head, taking at the top of the subtraction problem what you would advise your adult children, and you subtract what you would advise to yourself, and you're forcing yourself to stay in the relationship. And the end result is just exactly how much denial you have about yourself. And usually it's a lot. There's a big gap between what parents recommend for themselves versus what they recommend for the children they love and care for.
Yeah, that's huge. So it's like knowing what I want or what you want in a relationship, though, allows you to, I think, build it in a much more better way.
Yeah, much more better. I'm not sure about your grammar. I think it really, knowing myself allows me to do a better job of building. But then that's a problem. And I think this is another really important idea for everybody listening to get, is the learning curve is based on a lot of mistakes. And if you're not comfortable with making mistakes, I urge listeners to get comfortable making mistakes, because you are going to fall in love with incompatible people, and you are going to make mistakes in relationships, turning left when you should have turned right, speaking up when you should have, stayed silent, and vice versa. And I think, it's more a matter of, and what did we learn? Like back in elementary school, what have we learned, boys and girls? And the problem, I think, is so many of us don't do that critical incident debriefing, where we really suck the marrow of out of that former relationship for all of its lessons. If a woman went through an abusive relationship with a drunk and she was miserable in every way, she might come away with, well, don't date drunks. But that's only the beginning, right? There's so much more to be gleaned from that terrible life experience. And it's the same for us men. There's so much to be gleaned from these horrible mistakes we've made. And then also, one of the big mistakes would be getting involved or getting committed way too soon. And then instead of taking my time and getting to know her, because if she's pleasurable to meet, then she'll be pleasurable to get to know. And if not, well, then it's time for me to bail.
Yeah. And so a lot of this comes down to just being, I think, 100% honest and 100% yourself, like as far as with the other person, with the partner.
I can really readily understand why you would say that, but isn't that a bit of a pipe dream? Because I think even today, I can't be 100% honest with myself or to another, because there are parts of myself I still haven't become aware of. And I think that's the same for all of us who go through life. And there are things that I haven't yet learned how to talk about, like, say, my discomfort with a certain aspect of her behavior or her life.
Mm-hmm.
And if I haven't learned how to talk about it, it's all well and good to talk about honesty, but I think a lot of it is I don't have the thoughts, then I don't have the words, and then ultimately I don't have the courage. So that's a multi-dimensional problem that's really complicated. And if we could all just be a little easier on ourselves and let us all have a chance to kind of grow up within ourselves and become that better person who is better at knowing himself and better at telling the other who he is and better accepting who she is and better at trying to negotiate any way that we could possibly continue sharing our lives together. But I just have so many people who have come into my office over the last many years who say, well, we have a communication problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the therapists that I know, we all admit that we internally roll our eyes. And because, this is a problem we created. Therapists created this impression that human beings just don't know how to communicate, when actually, I think there's a whole lot of communicating going on, but we're not accepting what is being communicated. We just don't like the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And then for those people who are wanting to communicate or trying to communicate, often they don't know how to say what needs to be said. And so it's really a question of ignorance. And then finally, if I know myself and I know what needs to be said, but I'm really afraid of being alone, it takes a lot of courage to face my fear of being alone. So it's a complicated, multidimensional problem that deserves a multidimensional response. And I think that response is maturing and getting more life experience, which is why I always encourage everybody to date. And when I say date, I don't mean fornicate, but to date at least 30 people before you settle down with anyone, and fornicate if you must. If you like sex, of course, go ahead and have sex. But dating isn't, I don't use dating as code for having sex with someone. I just use it for that intentional process of getting to know someone. So you invite them out for dinner, or you invite them over to your house to watch a movie, or you're spending time together on a walk, but you're getting to know this other person. And whether two virgins decide not to have sex because of their religion, that's really not, I don't think that's really a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that two very religious people who believe strongly in remaining virginal until they get married, they could do a great job theoretically at getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And to old sinners like yourself and your next girlfriend who have fornicated their way across the country, they could also either have sex or abstain from having sex, or have sex here and there perhaps. But the main thing is not just the enjoyment of sex or the physical closeness that comes with that, but to really enjoy the getting to know the other person, including getting to know the things I don't like.
Yeah. Well, for me, the sex is becoming not as important because I've been there before where, first date, you're having sex or whatever. And then you're like, well, that didn't end the best.
Yeah. Well, for our listening audience who's already figured out you are a perfect man whore, that is, that's good news, because I think what's really going on is, as an intellectual, you're intrigued by the actual joy of getting to know another human being. So now the menu is much bigger. It's not just sex.
Yeah. Well, it's that, and also being like, can I be myself around this person? Because I've been criticized my whole life by everybody, including myself, because that criticism then from the external then goes internal. So I'm trying to let that go. And I'm just like, if I could just find someone who, and I know some people who do this, like some friends and stuff, they're like, let me be who I am. Because I'm like so tired of attempting to be somebody else. And not even that I ever was. I was just fighting. I was trying to be myself, but I was still having to fight to be myself. And now I'm just like, I'm just who I am. If you don't like it, then goodbye.
Yeah.
It's like, and
I wish we could all be that way. I mean, I wish that for every
beaten
child,
down.
every teenager listening to this, every gay kid, every kid who feels like they're nerdy because they like anything from bird watching to stamp collecting, whatever it is. I just think at the end of, all of our trying to please others, we're pretty much stuck with who we are, and to accept that, I need to find somebody who can like me or love me just as I am. And yes, it is normal that the vast majority of mankind will not find me intriguing or attractive, and to give the universe permission to have that kind of response. Not everybody thought Einstein was all that while he was developing his theory of general relativity. You remember he was a patent clerk in an office somewhere, and people weren't saying, "Oh, Einstein, so great to work with you on this patent form because I know you're just so brilliant." It just takes time, I think, for some of the wonderful things that are true about us to become manifest. And they become manifest, I think, most likely in the presence of somebody who sees it more clearly than maybe even you yourself or I myself see what is good about me. And they become your biggest fan. And it's actually sort of uncomfortable, maybe even awkward and embarrassing, because they just like me so much, or they like you so much. And then we have to go through this painful process of learning to tolerate love. And it's weird if you've never really had that your whole life. It's really disorienting. It feels like getting totally disarmed and being vulnerable in a whole different way.
Well, that's the next step for me, I guess. Either that or just being alone. You
don't look like you're looking forward to it, but I promise everybody out there is going to be great.
I really am. I just I really am. That's what I'm looking for more than ever. It's just all the other stuff just doesn't seem interesting anymore. Like just random dating, or just not going to that level,
or dating for the sake of having some social activity so I can check the dating box. I go out once in a while. But I think doing it, my experience, and I'm a happily married guy, but I meet amazing, wonderful women all over my local community. And I know the world is full of amazing, wonderful men. And if we could just find each other, I think we would do so much better. And just to relax with the journey of, seeking that person out and enjoying the pleasure of their company, while simultaneously enjoying the pleasure of the company of the people who are not really right for you. It's just that you don't keep them around as long.
Okay. All right. That's a good way to end it. So we'll wrap up the podcast there. And to end, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, you can visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question is, "Hi, Steve. My wife and I have been married for almost 20 years. She's a wonderful person, and I'm still extremely attracted to her. For about the last 4 years, she finds my affection and my initiating sex creepy and demeaning, which makes me feel terrible. Do we just have different love languages now? And that's from loving husband, not a creep."
That was funny the way he said that. At least it struck me as funny. I have nothing but heartfelt sympathy for this guy. And if I think about it long enough, even for his wife, I don't know what's going on with her, but how heartbreaking to be married to somebody for 20 years. You've laid down this foundation in probably the prime of his life to be with this person, and then dealing with the misery for 4 long years. That's just really hard. So I'm caught up in the pain of it all. What was the actual question?
So the 4 years she finds the affection and initiating sex creepy, and he's feeling terrible about it. And then he says, do we just have different love languages now? So it sounds like they're asking like what the hell happened here.
Yeah. So what happened? But he's asking from the position of like the guy who's on the street who's just got run over by a bus. Mm-hmm. What happened? What happened, I believe, was set in motion when they first got together, to be honest with you. And there's a breakdown in the intentional interview, because it isn't normal human behavior for a person spontaneously out of the blue to 16 years deep into a relationship, having started with someone they love and adore, to suddenly find him repulsive and off-putting. That's not normal.
Okay.
Unless there was some incident, like his whole personality changed when he got hit on the head in the bank robbery, or she has discovered that she's gay, and although she cared about him, heterosexual sex seems disgusting to her. So there are plenty of reasons, and so many men think, well, is there somebody else, or there must be somebody else. A lot of women think that too. There must be somebody else if they're not wanting to have sex with me. But that's not always true. A lot of times people have other reasons for just not finding someone attractive. But I hope, this is obviously written from someone who's not a regular listener, because we've talked about love languages, and that's not a thing. Loving people pick up messages of love in a variety of ways, whether my wife tells me she loves me, or she graces me with some physical affection, or she does some kind deed, or performs some thoughtful act of service. I'm going to feel loved in all of those circumstances, loved and grateful. And so it isn't a matter of, well, she got that Berlitz lesson in speaking a different love language, and so now she's inarticulate, when it comes to expressing love verbally. That doesn't really happen. But we don't know what really happened, and we don't know if he was kidding himself. So I'm going to respectfully suggest that maybe she was just never that crazy for him, and she's been just gutting it out for the last 16 years prior to when she changed, and she's just not doing it anymore. She's just not going to put up with that anymore. And yet perhaps they both, because of religion or because of children, they feel like they must stay in the relationship. And I will say, as the child of a divorced couple, I don't think any child benefits from two people living together miserably. I think that conveys so many horrible lessons for children, and they do pick up on those lessons. And I think it would make more sense for a couple to separate amicably and put the children first, and make sure that they take care of their children's emotional needs along with their financial needs, and then cooperate in making sure the kids have the best start in life they could possibly have. But for him, I have one last word, and that is to look for the silver lining in this gift from the universe, because you were obviously with someone who was not particularly in love with you. And for her to have the courage to let you in on that secret frees you to really begin anew in your search for a truly happy and successful, intimate relationship.
One that you want.
Yeah, one that you want, and with a person who wants you.
Yes, great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Steve. And I really enjoyed that conversation about letting your partner know what you want. I know we kind of went different directions, different times, but it seems to be something that I never did and that I am doing now. And hopefully listeners got some stuff out of it to apply to their future relationships, or maybe if they're even in relationships, they could maybe even try to start having.
God, I hope so. Or I'm just going to go out and commit suicide. What a waste of time.
Yeah. But it is possible to have a good, loving, happy relationship.
That's what they say. That's what all those marriage counselors say.
At least that's what Steve says. I mean, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all next time.